Hello, everybody. It's so good to see you today. We're here at MHTV and we're going to be talking homelessness today. And I'm quite interested to really get into the nuts and bolts of this issue with our fantastic guest. But before we do that, can we go over to Dave to find out how you can join in? And please, everyone, can you wish Dave a very happy birthday today?
21. Oh, thank you, Nicky. Yeah, 21 plus 20. Yeah, 41 today. Obviously, where could I better celebrate my birthday than on MHTV? It's great to be with you all tonight, and if you do want to get joined in, you've got two options. One of them is to post on the Facebook live chat, and the other one is you can comment on Twitter. If you're commenting on Twitter, make sure you use the hashtag MHTV so we can see your tweets, other people can see them, and the conversation kind of makes sense. Back over to you, Nicky.
Oh, fantastic. So let's go to Sam. Please, can you introduce yourself, Sam, and tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
So my name's Sam, and I have actually quite a few jobs. So I am nursing fellow for the Pathway charity, and the Pathway charity is not dissimilar to Macmillan, but it lobbies for better quality healthcare for people experiencing homelessness, and all inclusion health groups. So that might include, for example, Gypsy Roma traveller groups, people in prison, sex workers, vulnerable migrants, all those kind of things. But one key thing that Pathway does is it does needs assessments for and sets up specialist teams in hospital that facilitate better discharge for homeless and inclusion health groups, and I'm their lead nurse. So I do that 3 days a week, and then 1 day a week I currently work for the Queen's Nursing Institute as their homeless health programme lead. I'm sort of filling a gap for them, although I've been doing that for 2 years now. And in that role, I support nurses around the country who are in inclusion health roles, both in the community and in hospital, to set up services locally and link them in with the right networks and make sure they've got the right guidance and stuff. And then lastly, sort of keep my hand in. I work for Doctors of the World on a Tuesday on outreach in the City of London. So I work a shift basically 7 till 1. And some of those clients are sort of chronic care refusers, and they're on my caseload, and I see them every week, and obviously trying to work with them long term to come up with resolutions. And there is a flow as well. So I do see people that we manage to get off the streets quite quickly, and then I pass them on. So those three roles together sort of complement one another. And on the side, I'm also secretary of the London Network of Nurses and Midwives Homelessness Group, which brings together nurses in London and midwives and health visitors in London working in homelessness.
Every time you tell me the list of things you do, I'm thinking that's definitely more than one person.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of hours at the moment, but yeah. I mean, we're just recruiting at the Q&I for a 3 day a week post to sit alongside me. So that will be very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to get sort of like a bit of context around what's going on, can you tell us a little bit about the issue the many issues that are going on in homelessness at the minute? Because I remember you saying something like we had 170% increase in rough sleeping at one point during the lockdowns.
Yeah, right? So that's true. So obviously COVID has changed a lot, but prior to COVID, over the last 10 years, we've seen a significant increase in homelessness. And you're right, in London, that was 170% increase, but that's been pretty much mirrored across the country. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Austerity, welfare reform, austerity causing hostel closures because of local authority cuts. Reductions in floating support has meant that lots of people have abandoned supported accommodation, and EU migration has definitely contributed to that increase in rough sleeping. So at the beginning of 2009, 2010, we had about 3,900 individuals seen over the year rough sleeping in London. Just before COVID, it was 2,300 or something like that. So really significant increase. Obviously, everyone in has changed things at the moment. And initially, there was a clear mandate to bring everyone in, and that meant everyone, regardless of people, whether people had recourse to public funds, regardless of what their immigration status was. Regardless
so when you
of
say
whether
everyone in, you mean that initiative that was to house people who previously weren't housed?
Yeah.
So get people
hotels
rooms.
were, there was a clear mandate from the Ministry of Housing and Local Government that everybody should come in on the 23rd of March last year, regardless of their eligibility to come in. And that mandate, as it was, stayed in place for 3 months. Since then, things have been confused and somewhat locally driven as to whether that everyone in mandate has stayed. But certainly during this time, there has been much more provision for people experiencing homelessness than there normally would be. And it's been a total revelation for us just being able to, most of the time, meet a rough sleeper out and be able to bring them in straight away. You know, in peacetime, so to speak, someone has to be verified 3 times. You know, they have to be seen sleeping out 3 times before you can bring them in. They have to earn that right. Whereas at the moment, that isn't true. But that will revert back. And all the derogations, so all the stuff around, local authorities taking responsibility, temporary responsibility for people with the wrong immigration status, all of that is going to reverse. And it's really hard to know what we'll see at the end of that. Certainly, some people have really benefited from everyone in. There have been some people who it has resolved their issue in, and being given a hotel room rather than a hostel, with good food and a smartphone and nice clothes and, being treated properly and being given immediate access to mental health care and addictions care. We were in a whole different territory. For some people, that's made a major difference.
Yeah.
For others, I think it made a major difference, but then they've been rehoused in private rented sector accommodation 2 hours away from their any connections that they've got. So we have seen people, filtering back, and some people won't be eligible. So we don't know where things are. It's been an interesting learning exercise, everyone in, because I think the key thing for me has been, you treat people with respect. You treat people like adults. Funnily enough, they behave like adults, and I think a lot of our services are set up to, institutionalise and marginalise people still now. So as you can imagine, there's countless, research projects looking at this, but no clear sort of mandate saying, oh, we've got to change, we've got to change, we've got to learn from this now, and we've got to continue.
It's a shame because different countries do it differently, don't they? So there are some countries who absolutely house people as the first concern, and then everything else flows from there. And then because I think we've been experiencing these cutbacks for such a long time, as you say, we've been making people jump through hoops a little bit to prove that they deserve housing, to prove that they're right for that, and that's been complicated.
Yeah. So definitely our system, which involves, putting people in a homeless hostel for a couple of years and sort of earning the right to supported accommodation, then eventually earning your right to independent accommodation. I mean, as you can imagine, it brings people into contact with lots of other people that have issues, and also you can't work when you're in a homeless hostel, the way the benefits system works. So there's all sorts of issues with it.
Yeah. Housing
first, I mean, it works very well in the Scandinavian countries. It works very well in parts of America. And it's generally seen to be a much better answer to homelessness. Sort of a key feature of the housing first model is not just housing, but it is intensive support for that first, probably up to 2 years in accommodation, and with small caseloads.
Yeah.
I mean, in the UK, we've had some success with it, but there are definitely issues with the actual housing. So lots of the housing that is available, so for example in London, is a very poor quality and not in places where people want to live. And then you have a difficulty because your support worker might only have 10 people to look after, but they're so dispersed and disparate that they can't really provide that ongoing support in the same way. So yes, there's no question that there's a lot of belief that we should be changing to the housing first model, and the all-party parliamentary group on ending homelessness has spent the last 3 sessions, I think, talking about housing first and trying to influence that agenda.
Is it the financing that's standing in the way? Is that what the issue is? Was there any kind of?
I think housing is a really key problem here. Lack of quality, self-contained housing that people want to live in. And if you, so for example, if you look in Finland, where it's been incredibly successful, a lot of the housing first accommodation is purpose built, and it's actually really, really nice, and it's where somebody would want to live. And at the end of the day, and I think that was a real key learning for me from everyone is just, if you put someone somewhere nice, there's a reason they're going to like it, and that's true of all of us, isn't it? I mean, I think a real learning for me over the last year in the city, we have a number of people that don't want to come in, and they like living out in the city, among the city buildings, with the people that they talk to that come past. And lots of the people, they compare the housing offer that they know is available to what they've got, and it just doesn't interest them. It just doesn't interest them, because to them, sleeping out on the riverbank is nicer. And to be honest, I can see that, because some of the accommodation offers that we have for people, aren't great, and they're probably not where I would want to live. So I do think lack of appropriate accommodation is really key. And I suppose, I don't know, the other thing is, I mean, compared to, it's not true in America obviously, but compared to a lot of the Scandinavian countries, the scale of our homelessness is obviously more significant. So so to resource that kind of level of support would be expensive. I mean, I was listening to the John Richardson podcast last night, and it was just sort of, they were talking about the fact that when you look at the consequences of what that lack of having any excess bed capacity has been, the billions that have now been spent because we didn't have that bed capacity, you'd think that it would have made more sense to have run the health service not on a business model, but on a health model where you'd been running at 80% bed capacity, so that you had that given the system. So arguably we should be doing it, but housing first, because it would make much more sense long term. But I suppose the other thing is that governments are 4 years, aren't they? And what you see, the benefits of housing first accrue over a much longer period of time, as people settle down. So, in terms of reduction in criminal justice, in terms of reduction in evictions, there's lots of things that you don't immediately see the benefit of. And governments need punch now, don't they? They need to say that they've saved money now.
So what, just for people maybe who aren't as familiar with the type of work you do, what are the health impacts for people who are homeless? What's the likelihood in terms of their well-being, of impacting their well-being?
So it's really hard to generalise, and it's really important to say that there's a whole variety of people that are homeless, running from people who end up rough sleeping to homeless families. For people who are rough sleepers, as you would expect, there's a very high incidence of mental health problems and a high incidence of addictions. There's also a high incidence of chronic diseases, things like asthma, COPD, epilepsy, diabetes, all of those things. And as a generality, access to care and concordance with treatment is overall lower. So the consequences of that for rough sleepers is that we know there's some very poor health outcomes, particularly for rough sleepers, and average age of death. That's not life expectancy, and it's really important to understand that, but average age of death for people who have homelessness identified on their death certificates at the moment for a man is 46 years old, and for a woman is 43. And I believe that the last time that the average age of death in the general population for men of 46 was something like 1840 or something like that. It's a really long time ago. Obviously, that's the sharp end, you know, but
pretty sharp though, isn't it?
It's pretty sharp, yeah. We see that the average age of death of people that die within the hostel system is still somewhere between 52 and 55. So yeah, it's really problematic. And I suppose as well, just alongside the in particular looking at mental health, it's often complex trauma rather than severe and enduring mental illness, but it's often complicated by brain injury, which can be traumatic brain injury or alcohol or drug-induced brain injury. And then you've got other things like neurodiversity sitting on the top of that, and often language literacy, you know, all sorts of other complications. And all of those things obviously make treatment of the other things, you know, really, really difficult. Malnutrition's a big thing. In our families, just to quickly touch on families, I mean, a lot of homeless families are coming from migrant backgrounds, so we see other sorts of health problems. Malnutrition, I'm really sorry to say, is still a big problem. We see dental problems actually across all areas of homelessness, but you'll get particular things like vitamin D deficiency, for example. Obviously, across both groups, it's a higher incidence of infectious diseases, things like HIV, Hep B, Hep C in the homelessness community. So yeah, it's not the reason why there are inclusion physical healthcare nurses is because there is a high physical healthcare burden and people die.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thinking about, I mean, you've got an extremely complicated issue, and it also seems to be in flux at the minute as well, not just because it's a situation which is always complicated, but you were saying at this time of year there's particular issues around funding, so and sort of like long-term future planning. Is that something you could just give a bit of clarity about?
Yeah, so inclusion health services are Cinderella services, I suppose. I mean, for me, we've slightly shot ourselves in the foot actually by being a specialism, because to me, inclusion is everybody's business. And, the core of everybody's job is to make sure everybody can access their service and make sure people can come back. And that is what everybody should be doing. And if everybody did that, we wouldn't need to be here, would we? But the reality of it is we do have these health inequalities across all of these groups. Yeah. It's not prioritised, and it's funded in a very piecemeal way. And it's often funded by, say, money that's found, down the back of the sofa, coming up to the end of March. I mean, more recently, I can be a bit more vocal about that, and I do think that any system, which is funding inclusion in that way, is really really ought to be looking at itself. And actually, I think one thing that's really interesting is that there's such a narrative around cost saving. We're not doing this because you can't prove it saves money. But I just think, well, I'm sorry, if you're saying you'll only fund services to reduce inequalities if it saves money, then that's got to be discriminatory and wrong, hasn't it? Yeah. So I think we need to change the dialogue and actually say it's not acceptable to be funded by money down the back of the sofa at the end. It very much needs to be the core of what all of these systems do.
You've really clearly stated a situation, haven't you? You've got a complex system that takes a long while to sort things out. It's in flux. There's an opportunity to bed down and do something long-term and strategic. But all the time you've got this projects, you've got a lot of, it seems to me, reliance on voluntary pilot projects, things that go from year to year to year. And that's going to only make things more complicated for people with the passion that you have to work in these populations.
Yeah, lots of plasters on the system, lots of knee-jerk responses to which is what we're seeing now. I mean, obviously the health inequalities agenda has suddenly gone, blimey, we need to look after these vulnerable people that have been there the whole time. So what I was saying to Nicky before we came on was that at the moment we just seem to be inundated with all of these suggestions of, can you use this 10 grand here, this 20 grand here, or whatever to improve things? And the answer is, yeah, of course we can, but that isn't the way that you should be looking at it long term. And obviously we've got to try and reverse the narrative. I say not just to that, but also that it's everybody's. This needs to be absolutely the core of what all of your services, and you need to be funding all of your services in a way that they can think in a more outreaching, engagement, inclusivity kind of way, and that needs to be the core message, really.
Absolutely. So, what sort of things are we doing at the moment? What sort of things are ongoing in the world of sort of giving support and working with this population and this issue?
So obviously there are people like me who go out who go out onto the street alongside outreach teams to actively engage rough sleepers, and for some of those people, I say we can bring them straight in, and if we bring them straight in, then obviously a key thing is to engage them with a GP practice, mental health services, addiction services before you leave them. The
people just aren't homeless for no reason, are they? There are things that prevent somebody from maybe re-engaging or maybe accessing services, and that stuff needs to be factored in as well.
You very rarely find anybody that's homeless that doesn't have quite a lot of support needs, wherever they've come from. So you link people in, but for some people you can link them into mainstream services, and they will be able to cope and access those services on their own. In other cases, we might link them into, so there's a lot of peer support organisations in homelessness. So we might refer somebody to some peer support who would then help that person to access primary care, addictions, mental health services. For people that don't want to engage from a rough sleeping point of view, then it's the job of people like me to keep going and try and work out why, what the reason for that is. Obviously, whether that person's got mental capacity, and that can be quite difficult because they don't want to engage with the capacity assessment. So, often it takes long periods of time to do that. But even when they do, we can demonstrate they've got capacity. There's still self-neglect. And so at the moment, I've got 2 people going to the court of protection because they don't have capacity, and 1 going into inherent jurisdiction because they have capacity, but their legs in a pretty poor way, and they've had 5 admissions previously, and it looks like it's going septic, and they're older, and we are going to need to effectively dole them from the community. So that's one thing. We have much larger sort of community nursing teams, district nursing teams, if you like, but specialist district nursing teams that go on an ongoing basis into hostels and day centres, and provide all the mainstream primary care, including taking regular bloods, doing vaccinations, doing cervical screening, but on outreach. We obviously have specialist mental health teams, and most recently, we have ramp teams. Do you know, I can't, rough sleeping
I'm loving the name.
rough sleeping assessment, I can't remember the name. What's been really interesting about those is that pre-existing specialist mental health teams we've had have still been very much focused on severe and enduring mental illness, whereas the new ramp teams are really not diagnosis focused. They're focusing on function. So lots of the people that we would previously not have been able to get supported by them, who have complex trauma and possibly dementia and neurodiversity and whatever, now in, and that's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And I don't why.
Again, it's another of those weird things, isn't it, where we're trying to fit people with complex needs into a very structured and excluding system, and then wondering why they can't get into it, instead of just saying, oh, here are the problems, or here are the things we have that can help you. It's really wagging the dog all the time. It's very weird.
We have lots of specialist nurses that work with very specific communities as well, which are not, that may or may not be homeless, but so, for example, we have specialists working with sex working communities that obviously have specialist skills around contraception and complex trauma and all of those kind of things, and issues in terms of the bereavement and trauma of having children taken away and all of those kind of things. Lots of gypsy, Roma, traveller, boater people wouldn't see themselves as homeless, but some do, some don't. And obviously some of it depends on how transient they are. But there are a lot of similar issues in terms of access to care and the attitudes that people face. So we would probably, broadly speaking, see ourselves as the same community, and specialists and people working in home office hotels.
And then I'm amazed by how rude people are. Did you see that? I'm sure you saw the stuff when people were saying, should we give vaccinations to people who are homeless? And you're like, how was that a debate? What was that?
There was I don't know whether anybody saw it, the Mail Online, at the beginning of so they moved essentially in London, they moved everybody in inclusion health groups into tier 4 at the beginning of February. Very much led the agenda on that. And I know that actually they ended up in tier 6 at the end, but in London that decision was made. And shortly after that, a hotel near Heathrow, which was had lots of asylum seekers in it that had been dispersed from overcrowded previous home office accommodation. The Mail Online article on it is an absolute classic. Do have a look for it. It's a thing to behold, and they're interviewing someone. I can't remember what they call him, but this person who's boasting about him and all his mates getting their vaccine before everybody else, and it's just it's an exercise. It's a very divisive exercise, and it's an exercise in making more divisions. So. So and then we have specialist teams working in hospital, and the reason for that is the idea is to try and break the cycle, to maximise the benefit of the admission. So rather than getting people out immediately, just thinking about hospital care is notoriously siloed in the acute. Somebody will come in with a cellulitis of their toe and nobody cares that they've missed their TB appointment or their Hep C appointment, or they're not engaged with mental health services or anything like that. So the idea of the pathway teams is to use that admission and really try and unpick everything that's been going on, and follow that person up into the community and make sure they're linked into services. And those teams are multidisciplinary. So we see a lot of, for example, mental health practitioners in them, but mental health OTs and also physical health OTs, social workers, that they tend to be really multidisciplinary teams. And for some people, it can make a massive difference. There's also, in various places around the various vans, we're seeing more vans now. And also another thing that alongside the pathway teams, there's around the country a growing number of step down services for people experiencing homelessness from hospital in order to be able to support that ongoing work. It's quite confusing as to who funds that, and because there's a big argument in mainstream intermediate care, in elderly care, it's very clearly seen as health responsibility. Whereas here, somehow there ends up being an argument as to whether it's local authority or health responsibility, and that can make things quite tricky.
Well, I'm particularly enjoying your understatement tonight. Can I just say that I think you have an Olympic skill in letting it be understated. So let's just grab Dave in a little bit as well here. Dave, have you got any questions coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first one kind of links in on a theme of the COVID vaccination and how some people feel that people who are homeless are either unworthy or less worthy than other people. And it's this sort of how the narrative of strivers and skivers further entrenches kind of dodgy national policy. And that kind of people who succeed are people who try hard, people who fail are people that are skiving. And I suppose, have you got any kind of thoughts or comments about that narrative with people who are homeless?
I'd be pleased to hear that our new sort of lead for health inequalities is saying there's no quality without equality. So that is really good. So I mean, there was a National Inclusion Health Board, and that was disbanded in 2013. But hopefully, we're seeing the reintroduction of that. So hopefully, the NHS won't have that narrative, because it does. Because I can tell you that you go to a lot of A&Es and there's a lot of poor attitudes even within NHS staff. Why do other people experiencing homelessness? Because they don't have exposure to talk to people. They just don't know, do they? I suppose they're not skivers or scroungers or I mean, as Nicky was saying earlier, I've met none probably over the many years I've been working in this sector. People have got a story to tell, and they've got problems. And I suppose one of the key things that we did a big health needs assessment during COVID. And one of the quite heartrending things was that one of the most notable things that came out of it, when you asked the question, do you have someone to turn to when things get bad? About 80% of people said no. You've got a very isolated, unsupported population, people who don't have anybody to go to. And that's a really vulnerable and very difficult position to be in. I don't know if I've got any ideas from the audience as to how to change the narrative. Yes. So, I mean, what Pathway does is we have an experts by experience programme, and lots of big organisations do. So I do lots of, for example, parliamentary lobbying, and I wouldn't do any of it without taking an expert by experience with me. So no matter what the topic is, if it's, a homeless family that's been moved 5 times during the pandemic, that's actually happened, we're going to take them with us. If it's someone who's been denied access to registration at 3 GPs, we're going to take that person with us. Obviously, people need support to do that. And equally the opposite. So on the later this month, we got somebody who had a long-term history of homelessness, been on the streets for a very long time, also 15 years in prison previously, had been denied access to elective hip operation, and we've got him through it, and he'd been complaining over many months of pain, and he's done really, really well. I mean, I have to say, I'm surprised at how well he's done, but he has done really, really well. He's still in accommodation, he's pain-free, and he's coming to talk to the Royal College of Surgeons conference on the 26th alongside me, just to, because I think another thing is a lot of people in the NHS, for example, aren't exposed to what what a difference it can make if you are nice to people and you do the right thing in the right way. Actually, there is another thing, which is that I suppose quite a lot of people that are on the street begging aren't, I hesitate to say this, but aren't necessarily the people most in need. The people that I work with often aren't aggressively begging. They're not there. They're often quite withdrawn. You know, they've got a lot more problems. So I guess people's exposure to people experiencing homelessness can be from a quite small section of the population who are often very acutely addicted, and thus, you know, acting in a certain way. Okay.
I suppose one of the things, as you're talking there, you know, I do wonder how often people think, you know, how difficult it is to become poor and to become, you know, really poverty stricken. And I wonder, for those that have suffered badly through COVID, you know, have had secure jobs previously but have lost the jobs through COVID and have seen how really poor the benefits system is, you know, that kind of wake up of realizing, you know, that we're, you know, many of us are kind of one or two, you know, paychecks away from, you know, from poverty or from, you know, getting towards poverty, and hopefully if we learn anything from this, there will be some realization of that. I suppose a subsequent question to that is kind of, how does the benefit system help or hinder with homelessness? You know, does it kind of make it worse, or does it have any protective impacts?
I'll come back to that in a minute. On the first thing that you said, so yes, we've seen a lot of people. I mean, obviously there's supposed to be an eviction ban, but particularly around October, November, December time, we saw a lot of people being evicted who were in informal tenancy agreements. And in a lot of cases in London, you've got multiple occupancy accommodation, you know, places like, you know, classically where they found, you know, 26 people to a 3-bedroom house, where people are paying lower rents, but they don't have formal tenancies. So we have seen a lot of people on 0 hours contracts in a gig economy who don't have formal tenancy agreements coming out onto the street. Yes, that's absolutely true. For most of us, are we a paycheck away? I don't know, because we've got support networks, haven't we? And that's what makes some of these people different. They haven't got support networks, but we're certainly not far away. The benefit system. I mean, it's pretty impenetrable these days, isn't it? You know, actually doing a benefits application, you know, like everything, takes grit and determination, doesn't it? Literacy, language skills, credit on your phone, actually having a phone in the first place, having an address or knowing that you can use a care of address. So there's that aspect of it. There are problematic aspects of the benefits system. The change over to monthly payments from weekly payments wasn't right for everybody.
A lot of people.
In terms of PIP, for the move from DLA to PIP, that there have been issues of that, and obviously, it's, you know, some people with disabilities, for example, have suffered under that transfer. I suppose the biggest thing for us is that lots of people don't know that they can apply for PIP, personal independence paper, I should say, for anybody who's not aware of that. And sometimes we'll end up supporting people with their application. Takes a long time. And then they'll end up getting a huge back pay as one payment. And sometimes that's not the best and most productive thing either, particularly if someone's got addictions problems. And I do think that could be managed better. I think they're absolutely entitled to the money. But I think that, you know, the way in which that was filtered out. Sanctions, incredibly unhelpful. particularly on our client group, there are lots of really, really viable reasons why people can't turn up to their appointments. People who are homeless are incredibly busy often. They've got appointments to go to all over the place with key workers and housing support workers and stuff like that. And often their executive capacity, their ability to plan, all of those kind of things is affected, and they just get sanctioned. Less money, more reasons to go out and rob or beg or whatever. And finally, I always give very long answers, don't I? Obviously, people leaving prison who don't get their first universal credit payment for 5 weeks, that's just a massive own goal. And I still can't get my head around that.
It makes no sense at all, does it?
And it uses up, key worker time, applying for emergency payments. It's just the whole thing's just, I don't know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And just one last question, which is a really short question. Are any areas doing well?
In terms of what? In terms of service provision, or
I suppose in terms of homelessness, and I think of this, in terms of being someone that lives in Greater Manchester and hearing homelessness spoken quite a lot about by our Metro Mayor.
Okay, Manchester's not doing too badly. So I suppose that the 2 areas I would immediately pick up on, or maybe 3, would be, I'm going to go for Bradford, and then Brighton, and then probably Plymouth. Bradford, they're specialist. They have a specialist practice, but they've got a very strong vision on that, and that specialist practice does the work in the hospital. It's also got a 14-bedded step down. It's also got a street outreach van, but it's also got a recovery and wellbeing centre. So we with all sorts of, from yoga to employment advisor, whatever. So it's got a really sort of holistic wraparound kind of service that also supports all people experiencing. So anybody who might need a bit of extra support, or got learning disabilities, or whatever would be in. So it's not niche. So I would say that is a generally believed to be an excellent service. Brighton has a similar sort of model, with the additional, so they anybody who comes out of hospital in Brighton, so they've got that service, but they've also got people getting it at 6 months of floating support, just literally by virtue of having been in hospital, to help them with with anything. I picked Plymouth just because there's a lot of people have been doing brilliant things, for example, with vaccination, and they're a small area that's been lobbying to improve things a lot over a long period of time. But they've really grasped the opportunity, and they've been running events with bringing in dental and the street vets and the food banks, and getting everybody together in one place, but also steel bands and entertainment, and just having a little bit of everything there. And they've still been managing to do that with the COVID guidelines, but really doing everything they possibly can to make it nice.
So things that link all this together, aren't they? It's like, if you meet people where they are, help them with the problems they've got, and treat them like human beings. Oh, I think it seems to work quite well. And that holistic idea as well. The things that you want are the things that other people want. So to not just have a roof, but to actually have connections and meaning and purpose and fun. Those things are normal for everyone to want.
Absolutely. And one of the key things I struggle with on outreach is when in those conversations where they might go, well, would you want to live there? And it's and basically what we're offering is a room above a shop in Thornton Heath or something. Apologies to anybody who lives in Thornton Heath, by the way. I'm sure it's very nice. But I mean, for somebody who's living maybe in the park by the Gherkin, that genuinely I can see it's like, why would you want to do that? Okay. It's very, very
having
difficult.
some empathy, isn't it, for people as well? Just having some empathy.
And
we are getting a bit near the end of this, actually. We have whizzed into 44 minutes already. Did you want to just finish your thought there for a second, and then we'll just check if we've got more questions?
Another thing, you talked about loneliness. Another thing that people talk about who don't want to come in is they love the random conversations that they have when people are walking past and stuff. Not the ones where someone gives them money or whatever. It's not that. It's when someone stops and just randomly chews the cup with them and passes the time of day. And so the additional thing is that I think people see accommodation as quite isolating. Sometimes, they know that they're going to get abandoned.
But being seen, it's so fundamental, isn't it? Not just being looked at, but actually being seen and having somebody connect with you and care about you. It's just so obvious, isn't it? When you put it like that, how is that not something that we do better?
I want to set up therapeutic communities in with farms, cats and dogs. People experiencing like homelessness, like all of us, love dogs and cats, animals. One of the guys that last night was feeding the foxes and the baby mice. In a therapeutic community with a debating area as well, because people love to debate, and that's where I'm going to go and work.
Well, I tell you what, as well, we're about to get a lot of homeless dogs coming up, aren't we?
Yes.
If the news is to be predicted. So I think I've got a couple of questions that have just come in from students. So one is asking, you're passionate about what you do. How did you know what you wanted to do? How did you know you wanted to go homeless, I think is what they're asking. They're third year, so I guess that this is a question on their mind right now. How did you know what flavour nurse you wanted to be?
So I originally applied to be a mental health nurse, but changed in the middle of my course because I wanted to travel, and thought that the physical healthcare nursing would be more relevant or more useful to me. I don't know whether that's actually true, but I thought that might be true. I went to Australia and worked in Aboriginal communities, and then I went to Nepal and worked for 6 months there. And I think what I learned by that, because I had sort of grown up in that I want to save the world kind of mindset, was that actually you can't really save other communities. I mean, if you're going to do that, you've got to be a part of that community. You've got to be embedded in it. You've got to talk the language, and it's you got to commit your life to it, really. And I witnessed, particularly in Nepal, people driving around in their 4x4s, having a very nice life, doing development really, but not really changing the dynamics. So I came home a bit disillusioned, and I was literally walking along the Queen's Road pondering what I was going to do, because previously I'd been in A&E, and I saw somebody rough sleeping and went, there's people in need in my own country. It's just, and I just rang up what was then the homeless team in the South London and got a job. So how did I get the job? I just rung up and asked for one. So don't feel frightened to make contacts. Find out where your local team is, and make friends with them. Go and volunteer, or say, can you shadow, or whatever, because it will make a massive difference. And the key qualifying factor for doing this kind of work is the right attitude and wanting to learn, and people will see that in you. But other than that, there's no like, I don't know. Well, there isn't really any qualification to do. It's having the will to do it. And it's a major privilege to do the work, because you just every single day you just hear the most extraordinary stories from people. The most extraordinary stories. Still, and I laugh all the time as well. People's spirit is incredibly strong, and it's a very different job to. So I did do a stint as an A&E nurse practitioner in the walk-in centres, where you got 7 flues on the top from the worried well, and it's a country mile from that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually a pretty good place to leave it, actually. And it's so lovely to hear people who love what they do. Isn't it? If you've got any last things that you want to say, please do. Otherwise, we'll go over to Dave and see if he's got anything to finish up with. Is there anything you want to add, Sam?
No, I would probably just say, wherever you are, whatever role you're in, just think about who can't access your service, and think about, is there anything that you personally can do to help and facilitate that, because you'll be making a massive difference if you do.
Thank you very much. Dave, is there anything you wanted to say?
I suppose just to say, obviously listening to Sam speak tonight, really inspirational messages, and, a really brilliant speaker. And I suppose it's not surprising at all that she was I suppose it was surprising that she was the runner-up British Journal of Nursing Nurse of the Year. From what I've heard tonight, I think she should have been the winner. But, absolutely, really impressive to hear you speak. I'm also going to use that for a cheeky little segue that next week we do have the winner of the Mental Health Nurse of the Year at the British Journal of Nursing. So we'll share information about that after tonight's episode. But I'm sure, she will share. Yeah, brilliant. If you watch along, Sam. But yeah, they're my final thoughts, Nicky.
In that case, happy birthday to Dave again. And thanks so much to Sam for her time tonight. Really appreciated it. And good night all. Take care.
Good night.